I sat at the small kitchen table, my fingers tracing the delicate pattern of the lace tablecloth, the same one I had inherited from my grandmother. It was a beautiful piece that had seen better days, much like my own life. The light filtered through the window, illuminating the dust motes that danced lazily in the afternoon sun, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in my heart. Emily was in the other room, her voice rising and falling as she recounted her latest triumph at college, her laughter echoing like a melody that used to bring me joy. But today, it felt like a distant song, one that I could no longer hear clearly. "Mom?" she called, her tone laced with urgency. "Can you help me with this project? I need you to drive me to the store to pick up some supplies." I could feel my stomach tightening, a familiar knot of frustration and resignation coiling within me. It was as if my body was echoing the words I had just heard. My daughter had referred to me as her free employee. The phrase hung in the air like a dark cloud, ominous and heavy, suffocating my spirit. I had spent the last 2 decades pouring my heart and soul into raising her, sacrificing pieces of myself along the way. And yet here I was, reduced to a mere resource, a cog in her ambitious machine. As I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the linoleum floor sent a shiver down my spine. I had always thought that my role as a mother was sacred, a title that came with love and respect. But today, I felt stripped of my dignity, as if I were a mere shadow of the person I once was. I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the window, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and graying hair, and I barely recognized the face staring back at me. "Sure," I called back, my voice betraying no hint of the turmoil within. I plastered on a smile, one that felt more like a mask than an expression of genuine happiness. I was a performer in my own life, playing the part of the devoted mother, the supportive cheerleader, the unpaid assistant. But inside, a rebellion was brewing, a whispering voice urging me to reclaim my identity, to remember that I was more than the roles I played for others. As I drove Emily to the store, I could feel the weight of silence between us. She was lost in her phone, scrolling through social media, while I stared out the window at the passing trees, their leaves fluttering in the wind like tiny flags of freedom. I thought of all the sacrifices I had made. My career ambitions, my dreams of traveling, the late nights spent comforting her through heartbreaks and disappointments. All of it seemed to fade into the background, a forgotten melody in the cacophony of her youthful aspirations. "Mom, can you grab that for me?" she said, pointing out a bag of supplies as we entered the store. I nodded, my heart sinking as I moved mechanically through the aisles. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, amplifying the feeling of detachment that had settled over me. I could feel the prickle of resentment creeping in, but I pushed it down, telling myself that this was just part of being a mother. But the truth was, I was tired, exhausted from giving so much of myself without receiving anything in return. It felt like I was a well running dry, the last drops of water barely trickling out as I desperately tried to quench the unending thirst of my daughter's demands. I had always believed that love meant sacrifice, that putting my needs aside was a badge of honor, a testament to my devotion. Yet now I was beginning to wonder if that belief had only led me to a place of bitterness and resentment. As we returned home, I felt the tension in my chest tighten further, an iron grip that refused to let go. Emily was already planning her next project, her enthusiasm infectious, but I couldn't muster the energy to match her excitement. Instead, I stood at the kitchen sink, washing dishes, the water scalding hot against my skin, a distraction from the turmoil brewing within. With each plate I scrubbed, I relived the moments where I had put her needs before my own. Her dance recitals, her school plays, the late-night study sessions I had facilitated. I had been her steadfast support, the wind beneath her wings, and yet I felt like I was being used, like a worn-out tool left in the corner of a workshop. The ache in my heart grew heavier, a metaphorical weight that threatened to crush me. I turned the faucet off, the silence of the house amplifying my inner conflict. It was time to take a stand, to reclaim my identity. The thought of writing that resignation letter, one simple sentence that would convey my decision to step back from the role I had played for so long, brought a rush of adrenaline. I wanted to scream, to cry, to shake off the shackles that had bound me for years. But as I sat down at the table once more, the empty chair across from me loomed like a ghost, a reminder of the path I was about to take. I picked up a pen, the weight of it feeling foreign in my hand. I resigned from my role as your free employee, I scribbled, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a small act, but it felt monumental, like a bridge being built from the past to an uncertain future. In that moment, I realized that self-worth is not defined by the roles we play for others. It's about recognizing our own needs and desires, understanding that we are deserving of our own love and respect. I could feel the tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from a sense of empowerment that had been dormant for far too long. As I placed the letter on the table, I could hear Emily's footsteps approaching. My heart raced as I wondered how she would react. Would she understand? Would she be angry or hurt? The air grew thick with anticipation, the weight of my decision hanging between us like an unspoken truth. The door creaked open and she stepped inside, her eyes bright with the enthusiasm of youth. But as she caught sight of the paper perched on the table, her expression shifted, confusion crossing her features. I held my breath, bracing for whatever storm might come next. The moment felt suspended in time, the tension palpable as we stood on the precipice of a new understanding, or perhaps a deeper divide. "Mom, what's this?" she asked, her voice softer now, a hint of vulnerability breaking through her usual bravado. I looked into her eyes, searching for the little girl who had once adored me, the child who had hugged me fiercely after every victory. In that instant, I knew that this was not just a resignation letter. It was a declaration of my worth, a step towards reclaiming my life. The journey would be difficult, filled with uncertainty, but it was a journey I was finally ready to take. As the silence stretched between us, I felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, a chance for both of us to redefine our relationship. I took a deep breath, the air heavy with possibility, and prepared to step into the unknown. I sat on the edge of my bed, the familiar creak of the frame beneath me a reminder of how many years I had spent in this house, in this role. Sunlight poured through the half-drawn curtains, casting a warm glow on the cluttered room. It was a sanctuary of sorts, filled with memories, the soft pink quilt my mother had made, the framed pictures of birthdays and holidays, and the countless trinkets Emily had gifted me over the years. Each piece whispered stories of laughter, joy, and sometimes heartache. But today, I felt a tension coiling in my stomach, something taut and uncomfortable, like a rubber band stretched to its limit. Emily had just turned 20, and with that milestone came a new wave of expectations. I had always prided myself on being there for her, a steady anchor in a world that often felt tumultuous. But lately, as she plotted her course through college and her ambitions soared, I felt myself being relegated to the role of a support system, her free employee, as she had so casually put it at breakfast that morning. The words hung in the air like a foul odor, clinging to my skin, suffocating any remnants of the woman I used to be before I became Mom. I could still picture her at the kitchen table, a flurry of energy and excitement, speaking about her upcoming internship with a big marketing firm. She was radiant, bursting with ideas and enthusiasm as she outlined her plans. I leaned against the counter, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly, but as she spoke, the warmth of the mug slowly faded into something bitter. When she uttered those words, "Thanks for being my free employee, Mom," it felt like a slap, a realization that I had worn myself thin, stretched across her aspirations like a canvas with my own desires painted over in muted hues. The unease simmered inside me, climbing from my stomach to my chest, tightening around my heart. I felt like a marionette, strings pulled taut by an unseen hand, my movements dictated by her needs. And the worst part was that I had allowed it to happen. I had taken pride in my sacrifices, wearing my selflessness as a badge of honor, but the truth was I was suffocating beneath it. That afternoon, I found myself sitting at my desk, the familiar scent of old paper and ink filling the room. I had wrestled with my thoughts all day, and now, with the sun setting low outside, I felt the weight of a decision pressing against my ribcage, begging for release. I picked up a blank sheet of paper and my pen, the smooth surface waiting for my truth. My hand trembled slightly as I wrote, the ink flowing like an unspoken confession, the letters forming a sentence that felt both liberating and terrifying. Dear Emily, I resign from my position as your free employee. I paused, the words echoing in my mind. It was a simple statement, but it felt like a declaration of war against the years I had spent prioritizing her needs over my own. The ink dried slowly, almost as if it were afraid to commit to the permanence of my decision. I folded the letter carefully, cradling it in my palm like a delicate bird that might fly away if I squeezed too tightly. My heart raced at the thought of confrontation, the fear of how she might react, clawing at my insides. But as I sat there, I realized I was tired of living in fear, tired of being a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of my daughter's ambitions while my own dreams lay abandoned. I took a deep breath, my chest rising and falling like a tide. The air felt heavy with the weight of my own self-doubt, but beneath that, I could sense a flicker of hope, a whisper of what could be. I had spent years nurturing Emily, shaping her into the ambitious young woman she had become, but in that process, I had neglected the seeds of my own identity. It was time to water those seeds, to cultivate a sense of self that had long been dormant. That evening, I placed the letter on her desk, the paper stark against the clutter of textbooks and half-empty coffee cups. I could feel the anxiety coursing through me like electricity, my skin prickling with anticipation as I walked away, leaving the words to linger in the air. Would she understand? Would she see that this was not an act of abandonment, but rather an act of love toward both of us? My heart raced with uncertainty, the suspense of her reaction wrapping around me like a thick fog. The next morning, I awoke to the sound of doors slamming and boots stomping on the hardwood floor. I lay there for a moment, my mind still foggy from sleep. But as the events of the previous day rushed back to me, I felt a knot of dread form in my stomach. I had done it. I had taken a step towards reclaiming my identity. But the repercussions loomed like dark clouds on the horizon. I heard Emily's voice rising in frustration, and my heart sunk as I tiptoed down the hall, drawn to the sound like a moth to a flame. She was talking to her friend on the phone, her tone sharp and laced with disbelief. I can't believe my mom would do that. I mean, she's always been so supportive. Now she's just quitting? I don't get it. The heat of her words felt like a branding iron searing into the soft flesh of my heart. I pressed my back against the wall, listening as she continued. My instinct was to retreat, to hide from the storm that was brewing, but I couldn't avoid it forever. I had opened the door to a new reality, and now we both needed to step through it. When I finally emerged from my room, the air felt charged, thick with unspoken tension. Emily was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, her brows furrowed in frustration. The moment our eyes met, I felt a jolt of electricity pass between us, a mixture of anger and confusion, love and resentment. "Mom," she started, her voice wavering, "what were you thinking?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. I could feel the weight of her expectations pressing down on me, but I also felt the surge of my own resolve. I was thinking it's time for me to step back and find my own path. I finally managed to say, each word a small victory against the tide of her disappointment. Her expression shifted, a flicker of hurt flashing in her eyes. "But I need you. I can't do this alone." A part of me wanted to tell her that I had spent years being her safety net, but I silenced that voice. Instead, I took a breath, steeling myself against the swell of emotion. "I know you're capable, Emily. You've always been. It's time for both of us to discover what we truly want. As I spoke, I could see the realization begin to dawn on her face. The tension hung in the air, thick and palpable, like the moment before a storm breaks. Would she embrace this new reality, or would it push her further away? I waited, my heart pounding, uncertain of what was to come next. In that moment, I felt both terrified and exhilarated, standing on the precipice of a new chapter, ready to leap into the unknown. But the future remained shrouded in mystery, a soft cliff waiting to be navigated. I stood in the kitchen, the familiar scent of fresh coffee mingling with the crisp autumn air that floated through the open window. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that usually felt like a cozy embrace, but today the warmth was overshadowed by a heavy tension that draped over me like a thick fog. I could almost hear the clock ticking louder, each second echoing the weight of my daughter's words, "You're like my free employee, Mom." Those words rang in my ears, sharp and jarring, as I stared at the half-empty mug in my hands. My fingers trembled slightly, a telltale sign of the storm brewing inside me. I had spent years pouring my heart into Emily, nurturing her dreams, supporting her ambitions. But in that moment, I felt reduced to a mere cog in her grand design, a functional piece in a life I had envisioned for her, but that she had taken ownership of without so much as a thank you. I could see her across the table, her bright blue eyes wide with a mix of surprise and disbelief, as if she had just realized that I was not bound to her whims. Her hair fell around her shoulders in messy waves, a testament to the late-night studying I knew had taken place. Yet even in her shock, there was a glimmer of entitlement that I couldn't ignore, a belief that my sacrifices were a given, a part of the arrangement she had created in her mind. My heart raced, drumming against my chest like a frantic bird trying to escape a cage. How had we arrived at this point? The realization that I had become an afterthought in my own life stung more than I expected. I wanted to scream, to shake her until she understood the depth of my sacrifices, the years I had spent wrapping my identity around her needs and aspirations. Instead, I took a deep breath, grounding myself, fighting against the urge to lash out. "Emily, I'm not your employee," I finally said, my voice steady despite the tempest within. I could see her flinch slightly, as if my words were a slap. "I'm your mother. There's a difference." Her brows furrowed, confusion clouding her features. "But Mom, I just meant—" "No," I interrupted, my voice sharper than I intended. "You need to understand that my life doesn't revolve around your schedule or your expectations. I have my own wants and needs." The words tasted foreign on my tongue, like I was speaking a language I hadn't used in years. A stillness settled in the kitchen, thick and suffocating. The sun streamed through the window, casting golden rays that felt almost mocking against the tension in the room. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, a mix of embarrassment and indignation flooding my system. I was not the woman who had once been content to blend into the background of her daughter's life. That woman had disappeared, worn down by constant self-sacrifice. And now I stood on the precipice of something new, something terrifying. Emily stared at me, her eyes darting as if searching for a way to reframe the conversation. "I didn't mean it like that. I just thought, you're always available to help. I thought you liked it." "Did I ever say I liked it? Did you ever ask?" The silence stretched between us, taut like a snapped rubber band, and I could see the shifting dynamics in our relationship. It was as though we had suddenly stepped into a new landscape, one marked by the jagged edges of unspoken truths. Emily's mouth opened and closed, a fish out of water grasping for breath, and I felt a strange satisfaction at the sight. Perhaps this was the awakening I had needed. "I thought you'd always be there for me," she finally murmured, her voice shrinking to a whisper. "Always? When did I ever sign a contract for that?" I countered, my heart racing as I began to unpack the layers of resentment I had buried beneath years of maternal devotion.
As I watched her expression change from shock to something resembling anger, I realized I was no longer the nurturing figure who existed solely for her benefit. I was a woman reclaiming her voice, her autonomy, and it felt both liberating and terrifying. Emily's shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her body. "This isn't fair," she said, her tone a mixture of defiance and hurt. "I thought you loved helping me." "I do love you, Emily, but loving you doesn't mean I have to lose myself in the process. I've spent so long being your support system that I've forgot about my own dreams. I've neglected my own needs for too long. And if I'm going to be a good mother, I need to model that for you." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. The tension hung in the air thick as molasses, and I could feel my body responding to the uncertainty of where this conversation was headed. I was stepping into uncharted territory, and the fear of what lay ahead clawed at my insides. "What about my school? My job? I'm busy, Mom," she exclaimed, her frustration bubbling over. "I can't just do everything on my own." "I understand that, but you need to learn how to rely on yourself, too. I can't be your safety net forever. It's time for both of us to find our own paths." I watched as the realization crept into her expression, the way her shoulders tensed and her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the struggle within her, the internal battle between wanting to be independent and the comfort of relying on someone who had always been there. "I don't want you to leave me, Mom," she said, her voice breaking. "I thought we had a good thing going." The ache in my chest intensified, and I felt tears prick my eyes. "Emily, I'm not leaving. I'm just stepping back so you can step forward. It's time for me to find my own voice again." The words hung heavily between us, and I could sense the shift in the atmosphere. It was as if the ground beneath us was trembling, both fragile and full of possibility. I felt a mix of fear and exhilaration, the thrill of embarking on a journey where both of us could discover who we were beyond our roles. Emily's expression softened, and in that moment, I could see a flicker of understanding. "Maybe I don't want you to step back. Maybe I don't want to be on my own." I smiled faintly, my heart swelling with a bittersweet mix of pride and sorrow. "That's okay. We can figure this out together. Just know that I'm not just your mother. I'm Lisa, and I have dreams too." As the words settled between us, I felt a sense of hope blooming within me, pushing back the shadows of resentment and self-doubt. But as I tried to envision what our new relationship would look like, a knot of uncertainty twisted in my stomach. Would she understand? Would she accept this new dynamic? I glanced at Emily, who was now looking intently at me, her expression shifting from fear to curiosity. I could see the potential for growth, not just for her, but for me as well. Yet the tension lingered in the air, a reminder that this was only the beginning of our new reality. As I took a deep breath, ready to explore this uncharted territory together, the weight of the moment pressed down on me, heavy with the promise of change. What lay ahead was uncertain, but I was ready to step into the unknown, to reclaim not just my identity, but also the relationship I had with my daughter. And just as I opened my mouth to say the next thing, the doorbell rang, shattering the moment like glass. My heart raced again, this time not from fear but anticipation. What now? I shot a glance at Emily, whose eyes mirrored my own confusion. What unexpected twist awaited us on the other side? The moment those words left Emily's lips, a thick veil of silence wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the scent of burnt toast lingering in the air, a reminder of my morning rush. My hands were still gripping the edge of the counter, knuckles white, as if I were holding on to a lifeline. "Free employee," she had said, her voice steady, eyes glimmering with an unyielding certainty that pierced through me like a shard of glass. I had always taken pride in being there for her, driving her to school, picking up takeout after late-night study sessions, listening to her dreams and fears until my own faded into the background like a forgotten song. But now, the words hung like a storm cloud overhead, threatening to burst at any moment. The truth was, I had become a mere cog in her ambitions, a tool for her success instead of the mother she might have once cherished. I took a slow, deep breath, attempting to steady the whirlwind of emotions swirling inside. The weight of resentment settled in my chest, a rock pressing down on my heart. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, and I tried to swallow the lump that had formed in my throat, but it only grew larger. I had always feared that one day my efforts would go unappreciated, but hearing her say it so plainly felt like a betrayal. "Mom, are you listening?" Emily's voice sliced through my reverie, annoyance lacing her tone. She was standing there, arms crossed, her long hair falling over one shoulder like a black curtain, hiding the truth. I could see it in her posture. She had shifted from the eager daughter to a demanding boss, and I was left unmoored in my own home. "Emily, I began, but the words felt heavy on my tongue. My voice faltered, and I realized I didn't have a response that would fit the moment. I wanted to tell her how I felt, how her words had cut deeper than any knife, but instead I found myself staring into her eyes, those bright, ambitious eyes that had once looked at me with love, now narrowed slightly with impatience. "Look, I just need you to help me with this project for my internship. It's not a big deal. You're just the perfect resource," she said, the corners of her mouth twitching into a half smile that felt more like a smirk. I could feel the heat rising again, a flush of anger mixing with the hurt simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not your employee, Emily," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've been supporting you because I love you, not because I'm obligated to." There was a silence, thick with unspoken words, and I could see the flicker of confusion cross her face. But then, almost as quickly, it was replaced by a hardened resolve. "This is what people do when they care, Mom. They help each other. You know that." As if someone had flipped a switch, I felt the familiar sting of tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. I blinked them back, unwilling to let her see the turmoil beneath my calm exterior. I had poured so much of myself into her, and now, faced with her entitlement, I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. "I've been there for you, Emily. I've given up so much," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to think about what I want, too." At that moment, I realized how long it had been since I'd allowed myself to consider my own needs, desires, or dreams. I had become a vessel for her aspirations, a shadow in her spotlight, and the realization hit me like a cold wave crashing against the shore. I craved something more, something that was just mine, and that thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "Then resign," she snapped, her tone laced with frustration. "It's not that complicated." I felt the world around me blur, my mind racing as I replayed the moment in my head like a broken record. Resignation. The very word echoed in my mind, heavy with implications, as if I were standing at the edge of a cliff, peering down into the unknown. The next few days were a blur of emotions, each one more intense than the last. I tried to maintain my composure, but with each passing hour I could feel the cracks forming in my carefully constructed facade. Emily was busy with her project, her focus unwavering, while I drifted through the house like a specter, haunted by the implications of my one-sentence resignation letter. I could hear her voice on the phone with her friends, laughter spilling out in bursts, and I felt a pang of loneliness as I wondered when my own laughter had last filled these walls. I was no longer the center of her universe. I was merely an accessory, needed only when convenient. One evening, I sat in the living room, the dim light casting long shadows across the floor. I picked up a book, but the words danced on the pages, refusing to settle into meaning. The silence was deafening, and I could feel the walls closing in, pressing against my chest. In that moment, I saw myself reflected in the glass coffee table, a woman who had lost her identity, folded away in the corners of her daughter's life. As I sat there, the metaphor of a bird in a cage took flight in my mind. I had become that bird, flapping its wings, but never soaring.
held captive by the bars of expectation and obligation. I longed to break free, to rediscover the sky, but that desire was tangled with guilt, a poisonous vine wrapping around my heart. The following day, I decided to confront the tension head-on. I found Emily in her room, surrounded by textbooks and scattered notes, her focus intense. The sight tugged at my heartstrings. A part of me wanted to cradle her, to tell her how proud I was. But the other part of me, the one that had been silenced for too long, urged me to speak up. "Emily," I said, my voice steady, as I leaned against the doorframe. She glanced up, her brow furrowing slightly. "Can we talk?" "Sure, if it's quick. I have a deadline," she replied, her tone dismissive. But I pressed on, determined. "I need you to understand that I can't be your free employee anymore. I'm your mother, and I love you, but I also need to find my own path," I said, the words tumbling out like a river breaking free from a dam. For a moment, the air between us thickened, heavy with unspoken words. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the confusion flickering in her eyes as she processed my declaration. "You're being ridiculous, Mom. I'm just asking for help. Everyone helps each other," she said, the frustration evident in her voice. I felt the sting of her words, but beneath it, I sensed a flicker of something else. A hint of fear, perhaps. The realization that her mother, the one who had always been there, might not always be available. It was a truth that neither of us had anticipated. "I know you want me to be there, but I also want you to understand that I need to be there for myself, too. You're growing up, and I need to grow, too." There was a moment of silence, and I could see her processing my words. The tension in her shoulders eased, just a fraction, but it was enough to give me hope. Would she understand? Would she see that my love for her didn't diminish my need for independence? As I stood there waiting for her response, I felt the weight of uncertainty settle in my stomach. Would this be a turning point for us? Or would it drive a wedge deeper into the fabric of our relationship? I couldn't predict the outcome, but I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to step into the unknown, to embrace the uncertain journey of rediscovery, even if it meant risking everything. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow across the living room, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air like tiny, errant thoughts. I sank into the familiar embrace of the worn-out armchair, the one that had cradled me through countless sleepless nights and endless cups of tea. It was my solace, my refuge from the chaos that had begun to envelop my life, particularly after that fateful announcement from Emily.
"Mom, you know you're my free employee, right?" she had said, her tone light, as if we were discussing the weather rather than the role I had quietly assumed in her life. The words hit me like a slap. A mere joke, but one that resonated with an uncomfortable truth. I had been her unpaid assistant, her confidant, and often her emotional crutch. There was a time when I wore those roles like a badge of honor, but that day I felt the weight of them pressing down on me, suffocating me like a too tight corset. As I sat there, I could feel my heart racing, a quickened pulse that matched the rising tide of resentment coursing through my veins. I should have laughed it off, should have made a witty comeback, but instead I had been struck silent. The laughter that followed felt hollow, echoing in the corners of my mind, mocking my inability to articulate the turmoil brewing within me. I had spent years crafting Emily's life, pouring my energy into her dreams as if they were my own. I had sacrificed nights of sleep, weekends of rest, and even my own ambitions, convinced that my worth was tied to her successes. I was the quintessential mother, the one who puts everything on hold, a selfless figure in the backdrop of her child's vibrant tableau. Yet, as I stared at the flickering shadows on the wall, the reality began to sink in. My identity had blurred. I was no longer Lisa. I was just Emily's mom, a role I had embraced with fervor, but one that now felt like chains binding me to a life I didn't recognize. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, as I typed out a message to my closest friend, Sarah. We had shared so many late-night conversations, unraveling the threads of our lives, supporting each other through the ebbs and flows of motherhood. I needed her now more than ever. Can we talk? I need some clarity. I feel lost. My thumb hovered over the send button, a small gesture that felt monumental. What did clarity even mean? Did it mean I had to confront the uncomfortable truths about myself? I pressed send, the weight of anticipation settling in my stomach like a lead balloon. The moments crawled by, each tick of the clock echoing in the silence of the room. I glanced at the family photos hanging on the wall, their smiling faces a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I saw myself in those images, thin, youthful, filled with hope. Now I felt like a specter of my former self, reduced to a mere supporting character in someone else's story. As I shifted in the chair, the fabric scratched against my skin, a physical reminder of my discomfort. Finally, my phone buzzed. Of course! How about coffee tomorrow? Sarah's response was immediate and warm, as always. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with dread. What would I say? I knew I couldn't just spill out my frustrations about Emily and her entitled comment. I had to dig deeper, to peel back the layers of my own complacency. The next day, as I sat across from Sarah in our favorite cafe, I felt a flurry of butterflies in my stomach. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, wrapping around me like a comforting hug. Sarah looked at me, her brow furrowed, sensing the weight of my unspoken thoughts. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the cup against my palms, grounding me in that moment. "Lisa, what's going on?" she asked, her voice soft yet probing. I could see the concern etched in her features, and it ignited a flicker of vulnerability within me. "You seem different." I hesitated, my mind racing. How could I distill my feelings into mere words? "Emily called me her free employee yesterday," I finally said, the confession tumbling out. It felt like a release, but also like opening a door to a room filled with shadows I had long ignored. Sarah's expression shifted to one of understanding, her eyes widening slightly. "That must have hurt." "It did," I admitted, my voice trembling. "It made me realize how much I've given up. I've dedicated my life to being the perfect mom, but in the process I've forgotten who I am. I feel like a ghost in my own life." We sat in silence for a moment, the sounds of the cafe fading into the background. I studied the steam rising from my cup, twisting and curling like the thoughts I couldn't quite grasp. I've built my entire identity around her, and now I don't know where I end and she begins. I feel trapped. It's suffocating, Sarah. She leaned in, her expression earnest. "You know, it's okay to want something for yourself. Your worth isn't defined by your role as a mother. You're allowed to have dreams too."
Her words resonated within me, echoing like a long-forgotten melody. Yet I felt a twinge of guilt threading through my chest. How could I put my needs before Emily's? Wouldn't that make me selfish? The internal battle raged on, and I felt a familiar tightness in my throat, a precursor to tears. I don't want to disappoint her," I whispered, looking down at the swirling patterns in my coffee. "But I also don't want to lose myself completely." Sarah reached across the table, her fingers brushing against mine, grounding me once more. "You won't disappoint her by being true to yourself. In fact, it could inspire her to do the same. You're her role model, whether you realize it or not." As the words sank in, I felt a flicker of something. Hope, perhaps. It was faint, but it was there. I had spent so long chasing after Emily's happiness that I had forgotten to check in with my own. My role as her mother didn't have to overshadow my desires or diminish my identity. It could coexist with my aspirations, but only if I allowed it. We finished our coffee, the conversation flowing more freely as the initial weight lifted. Yet, as I returned home, I felt the familiar tension creeping back. Emily would be waiting, and I knew I needed to have a conversation with her. The thought sent a tremor through me, uncertainty pooling in my stomach. What if she didn't understand? What if she pushed back? I stood in front of the mirror, gazing at my reflection. There was a flicker of resolve behind my eyes, but apprehension still loomed. I had a choice to make, a path to carve, but the road ahead was murky, full of potential conflicts and revelations. Could I truly balance my needs with my role as a mother? As I heard the familiar sound of Emily's laughter echoing from her room, my heart raced. The moment of truth was upon me. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I wasn't just stepping into a conversation. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that would require vulnerability, honesty, and the courage to redefine our relationship. As I approached her door, I hesitated. Was I ready to face the unknown? The shadows of uncertainty lurked just beyond the threshold, waiting to see what lay ahead. I took another breath, pushing the door open, ready to find out. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows that crept across the living room floor like whispers of discontent. I was perched on the edge of the faded floral couch, a space that had once felt like a nest of comfort, but now felt like the edge of a precipice. My fingers absent-mindedly tugged at the fraying seam of my sweater as I waited for Emily to arrive home. The air was thick with the scent of impending confrontation, a heaviness that wrapped around me like a damp blanket. Emily burst through the door, her energy a stark contrast to the stillness that enveloped me. She tossed her bag onto the floor and flopped onto the couch beside me, her laughter ringing through the room, bright and carefree. I had always admired her ambition, that spark that seemed to ignite everything she touched. But tonight, that spark felt more like a flame, and I was the moth drawn too close to the fire. "Mom, guess what?" she exclaimed, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "I finally got the internship at the marketing firm. It's going to be amazing." Pride surged within me, but it quickly twisted into something darker. "That's wonderful, Emily," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm really happy for you." "Thanks," she chirped, oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface. "I'll need you to help me with my schedule, though. Making sure I have time to study and do my projects. I can't do it all myself." The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. I felt a tightening in my chest, a physical manifestation of frustration that had been building for years. I had spent countless hours juggling her needs, reshaping my own dreams to fit the mold of motherhood. But now, I felt like a rubber band stretched too thin, on the verge of snapping. "Emily, I need to talk to you about something." She turned to me, her expression shifting from excitement to curiosity, and I saw the flicker of confusion in her eyes. "What's up?"
The moment felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, the wind whipping around me, urging me to take the leap. I can't be your free employee anymore. I need to set some boundaries. Her brow furrowed, and I could see the gears turning in her mind. "What do you mean? You've always helped me with everything." A knot twisted in my stomach, a deep sense of resentment bubbling to the surface. "Yes, I have, but I've lost sight of who I am in the process. My needs matter too." The silence that followed was deafening, thick with unspoken words. Emily's mouth opened slightly, as if she were about to argue, but then she closed it again, her jaw tightening. I could see the flicker of entitlement in her eyes, that belief that my sacrifices were simply part of the deal we had made. "Mom, it's just asking you to help me. she said, her voice tinged with impatience. "You've always done it." "Always? Yes," I repeated, my heart racing, a drumbeat of anxiety. "But that doesn't mean I have to continue. I'm not just your mother, I'm Lisa, and I have my own life, my own dreams." She shifted in her seat, her brows knitting together. "But I need you. I can't do it without you." The panic in her voice was palpable, and I could feel the weight of her expectation pressing down on me. "I know you feel that way," I replied, my own voice trembling slightly. "But you need to learn to stand on your own. My support shouldn't come at the cost of my own happiness." Her eyes narrowed, and I caught the slight twitch of her lip, a micro gesture that signaled her growing irritation. "This isn't fair, Mom. I've worked hard for this opportunity. Why can't you just be supportive?" The accusation stung, a sharp reminder of the sacrifices I had made. "I am supportive, but not at my own expense. You're 20 now. It's time for you to start taking responsibility for your own life." The words tasted bitter on my tongue, and I felt a wave of guilt crash over me. Deep down, I feared that I was failing her, that I was not being the mother she deserved. But as I looked into her eyes, I saw the girl I had raised, the one who had the potential to fly on her own. "Mom, please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I just want to know that I can count on you. Isn't that what family is for? Family is also about teaching each other how to be independent. I can't be the one who carries you through everything anymore." The air crackled with tension, and I felt my heart pounding against my ribcage, a frantic rhythm that echoed the turmoil within me. I had spent years nurturing her, pouring every ounce of myself into her aspirations, and now I was being asked to let go. It felt like standing in a river, desperately trying to hold on to a rock, knowing that the current was too strong. Emily's face fell, and for a brief moment I saw vulnerability flicker across her features. It was a reminder of the little girl who used to look up to me with wide eyes, seeking comfort and guidance. But that girl had grown, and in many ways, I had allowed her to believe that my worth was tied to her success. "I can't believe you're doing this," she said softly, the fight draining from her voice. "You're just going to walk away from me when I need you most?" "I'm not walking away," I said, urgency creeping into my tone. "I'm taking a step back so I can find myself again. I can't be everything for you if I don't know who I am." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, and I felt the fraying edges of my resolution begin to unravel. I could see the hurt in her eyes, the realization that her mother was not just a figure to lean on, but a woman with her own aspirations, her own needs. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not losing you," I said, my own heart aching at her words. "But we both need to redefine our relationship. I want you to succeed, but I can't do it for you anymore. You have to discover your own strength." As the words settled between us, I felt a mixture of fear and hope. This was uncharted territory, a path I had never ventured down before. The thought of a new relationship with my daughter, one built on mutual respect and understanding rather than obligation, was thrilling and terrifying. "Mom," she began, her voice trembling, and I could see the tears pooling in her eyes. I reached out, placing my hand on her shoulder, a gesture of love that transcended the tumultuous conversation. "I love you, Emily. I always will. But we both have to learn how to stand on our own. It's time." As her gaze met mine, I saw the flicker of realization, the first spark of understanding that perhaps this was not just a confrontation, but a turning point for both of us. But just as the air began to lighten, I felt a shadow creep in, a whisper of fear that maybe I had opened a door that could not be closed. What would this new reality look like? Would we find our way back to each other, or would the distance grow between us? As I held her gaze, I felt the uncertainty of the future stretching out before me, a vast expanse of possibility, both exhilarating and daunting.
And in that moment, I realized that the journey to self-discovery had only just begun. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of garlic and tomatoes swirling around me, a comfort that once felt like home, but now felt more like a prison. The evening light filtered through the window, casting soft shadows on the countertop, and I stirred the sauce absent-mindedly, my mind wandering to the conversation I had just had with Emily. My heart was still racing from her words, echoing in my ears like a dissonant chord that refused to resolve. "You're my free employee anymore," she said, a playful smirk on her face, but the weight of the phrase sunk deep into my chest, a stone lodged in my throat. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the familiar tightness in my shoulders only intensified. There was a time when I would have laughed off such a comment, chalking it up to her youthful naivete, but today it felt like a dagger. I could feel the tension coiling in my stomach, a twisting knot that made me wonder if I had somehow failed her, or worse, if I had become the very thing I had fought against, a doormat.
"Emily," I started, my voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. I wanted to explain that my worth wasn't tied to my willingness to serve her whims, that I was not simply an extension of her ambitions. But all that came out was a weak, "That's not fair." She shrugged, her eyes glinting with a mix of ambition and entitlement, as if my sacrifices were merely the backdrop to her own aspirations. I watched her, my heart aching with the realization that the little girl who once clung to me, needing my reassurance and love, had morphed into someone I'd barely recognized. After she left the room, I took a moment to collect my thoughts, leaning against the cool marble of the counter, the hardness of it grounding me in the chaos of emotions swirling inside. I felt like a ship lost at sea, tossed about by waves of resentment mixed with a deep-seated love. That was the crux of it, wasn't it? The delicate balance between wanting to support her and recognizing my own needs. As I stirred the sauce again, the wooden spoon clattering against the pot, I suddenly realized I was tired, bone-deep tired. I had spent years facilitating Emily's dreams, pouring my energy into her projects, her studies, her life. I had sacrificed pieces of myself, convinced that this was what a good mother did. But in the process, I had lost sight of my own aspirations. I had become a shadow of my former self, a vessel to carry her ambitions while neglecting my own. The thought of resigning from my self-imposed role as her free employee stirred something deep within me, a flicker of rebellion. I imagined writing a resignation letter, a single sentence that would encapsulate my decision to reclaim my autonomy. "I resign from being your free employee." A simple statement, but it felt monumental, like a stone being cast into a still pond, sending ripples through the very fabric of our relationship. As the night wore on, I found myself alone at the kitchen table, the remnants of dinner pushed aside, a half-empty glass of wine in front of me. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over Emily's name. I could feel my heart thudding against my ribcage, uncertainty gnawing at me like a relentless tide. What would I say? How would she react? The idea of confronting her made my skin prickle with anxiety, but I could no longer ignore the weight of my own needs. I needed to speak up, to assert my worth beyond the roles I played. Finally, I took a breath, steadying myself. "Emily," I texted, my fingers trembling slightly, "can we talk tomorrow? I need to discuss something important." The 3 little dots that indicated she was typing back felt like an eternity. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, wondering what this was about. When her reply came, it was simple, yet it sent a shiver down my spine. "Sure, what's up?" The next day, the sun rose with a warmth that felt foreign to me, almost mocking in its brightness. I sat at our kitchen table, my thoughts racing as I waited for Emily to arrive home from class. My hands were clammy, the table cool against my skin. I could almost hear my heart beating, a steady drum urging me forward, reminding me that this conversation was necessary, no matter how uncomfortable. When Emily walked through the door, her hair cascading over her shoulders, I almost lost my nerve. She greeted me with a smile, her backpack slung casually over one shoulder, but I could see the glint of ambition in her eyes, a fierce determination that both inspired and intimidated me. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" she chirped, her voice light, as if we were about to discuss the weather rather than the very essence of our relationship. I took a deep breath, my heart racing. "Emily, I want to talk about what you said the other day." Her smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, trying to keep my voice steady. "When you called me your free employee, it struck me hard. I've been feeling like I've lost myself in trying to support you, and I can't continue like this." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us like an uninvited guest. I could see the gears turning in her mind, the way her brow furrowed slightly as she processed what I had just said. I didn't mean it like that," she replied defensively, crossing her arms. "I just meant you helped me out a lot." "Help is one thing, Emily, but I've been sacrificing a lot of my own dreams for you. I need you to understand that I am more than just your support system. I have my own needs too." Her mouth opened slightly, as if she were about to protest, but then she hesitated. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the realization that perhaps she hadn't considered the toll our dynamic had taken on me. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said slowly, her voice softening. And there it was, the tiniest crack in the wall between us, a glimmer of understanding. I felt something shift inside me, a movement toward hope that maybe we could navigate this together. As we spoke, I could feel my pulse steadying, the tension easing from my shoulders. I took a chance, allowing myself to be vulnerable, sharing my dreams that had been silenced for so long. I spoke of the art classes I had once wanted to take, the novel I had dreamed of writing, the adventures I had put on hold. Each word felt like a brick being lifted from my chest, the weight of years of self-neglect slowly dissipating. Emily listened, her expression shifting from confusion to contemplation. I felt a warmth spreading through me, a sense of empowerment blooming like a flower breaking through the earth after a long winter. Perhaps this was just the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for both of us. But as I watched her process my words, I couldn't help but wonder how this would change our relationship. Would she embrace the idea of me pursuing my own path, or would she resist, clinging to the comfort of the status quo? The uncertainty lingered in the air, a soft tension that reminded me that while we were stepping into new territory, the journey ahead was still fraught with challenges. I could feel my heart fluttering again, the thrill of potential mixed with the fear of the unknown. "Can we talk more about this later?" Emily asked, finally, her voice tinged with a cautious hope. "Yes," I replied, a smile breaking through the anxiety that had gripped me just moments before. "I'd like that." As she turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the woman she was becoming. Strong, ambitious, yet still my daughter. I felt a warmth in my chest, a soft glow of potential. The road ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to walk it, to carve out space for both of us to grow. And as I watched her walk away, I realized that my journey of self-discovery was just beginning. The future remained uncertain, but in that moment I felt a surge of hope, a whisper of possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, we could find a balance that honored both our dreams. The cliff was softening beneath my feet, and I was ready to leap into the unknown.